is an old chestnut, as you've heard many times. We just can't leave this out ever.
Well, the kids love him. The rappers.
One of my favorite girls.
They call him OG, original gangster.
She gets hungry for dinner at 8. Loves the theater.
Frank Sinatra was unbelievably glamorous. He's the most glamorous person. He just is this entity that defines what glamorous really is.
That's why anyone else?
He was the gangster, he was the rock and roller, he was the punk.
Doesn't like dice games with barons and earls.
He sang Heartbreak, and you knew that heartbreak was for real.
Will not dish the dirt.
Frank Sinatra was the essence of cool.
Oh, he's one of the greatest singers that ever lived. Nobody will ever top him. He'll always be that.
And then he began to sing, and it was magic time.
Magic.
Absolutely.
He was one of the very few singers who sang without a mask.
Defiant.
Glamorous.
Violent.
The man invented pop music.
He was the first pop idol, the first to trigger mass hysteria.
These thousands of screaming girls, the sound was awesome and frightening. It was inhuman almost.
When music is sweet.
He was a rock and roller before rock and roll.
One night he got so pissed, we were staying up at the 12th floor of the Fontainebleau. Went out on the terrace and we threw all the furniture on the beach at 12 midnight. It was his world and we only lived in it.
Play hide and seek. I want to go and bounce the moon just like a big balloon.
He shone like no other star. No one else had the same mighty hold on the public's imagination.
This was Frank Sinatra. Everybody in the world knew him.
He was the American dream. Glamorous, powerful, rich, and free.
You make me feel there are songs to be sung.
This guy was an icon of American culture. I mean, it was, you know, you seduced women to his music.
But Frank Sinatra had another side too. A side that for decades he tried to hide from the press. According to our research, his career was partly made by the mafia.
In the middle of the picture is Frank Sinatra.
Well, it was obvious. That's exactly what Sinatra wanted to be. Sinatra wanted to be a gangster.
And that's the dark side. It's a very dark side.
This is the story of a man of many contradictions.
Take it easy.
An idealist who admired gangsters.
I think he was the publicity department for the mob.
Till now, the full extent of Sinatra's mob ties has never been revealed.
He was our guy. Yeah, he was our guy.
The mafia held Hollywood in its grip.
I think Frank realized power is it in Hollywood.
And in those days, the mafia was powerful.
When anybody can get you killed, they're powerful.
And they could get you killed that fast.
Sinatra seemed blind to their violence.
I always wondered if Frank, it was as if he had two separate hearts, one to pump the warm blood and one to pump the cold blood.
No comment.
He was close to gangsters.
No comment.
They seek us out, and I'm not being frivolous about it, but they're kind of starstruck.
He was close to politicians, too. Through Sinatra, the mafia wanted a connection to Jack Kennedy.
And when he failed his mission, you know, that was brutal.
In a hotel in Miami, the mob sent him a warning by room service. The severed head of an animal.
Which is a mafia symbol for death.
The mafia connection began years earlier. Flanked by gangsters, Sinatra slipped into Cuba. He went to see a man believed to have committed 20 murders. A well-mannered sadist, Lucky Luciano, was head of the American mafia, and Frank Sinatra was his friend.
He was not a victim of the mob. He was a participant.
The mafia helped create Sinatra.
His career, his fortune rose with that help.
The story of Sinatra and Luciano began in a small town in Sicily. Sinatra claimed that his family came from Sicily's balmy east coast or from Agrigento on the other side of the island. It wasn't true. In the hills of northwest Sicily, not 15 miles apart, are 3 small towns. Corleone, made famous by The Godfather, Prizzi, as in Prizzi's honor, and La Cara Friddi. Together, they comprise the mafia's heartland. Dirt-poor La Cara was known for only one thing, being the birthplace of Lucky Luciano. As we now know, Sinatra's family came from here too.
Evidence we uncovered in the United States, as well as in churches in Sicily, and the work of a professional genealogist, established that Sinatra's family came from the same small village in Sicily as Lucky Luciano. Luciano's family and Sinatra's family lived on the same small street at the same time. They were buried in the same churchyard. They were baptized in the same church in the same font.
Yet Sinatra always blurred his family's origins.
Almost certainly he did so deliberately to obscure the fact that his family had come from the same village in Sicily as Lucky Luciano.
Separately, the Lucianos and the Sinatras arrived in America. The Lucianos made for Manhattan, the Sinatras for New Jersey, across the Hudson River. Hoboken wasn't exactly glamorous, but nor was it the worst place to wind up in America. Immigrants fought for control of the piers where ships unloaded.
I actually heard about 5 guys getting killed in the town, trying to take over the piers.
The Italians lived on one side of town, the Irish on the other. They dismissed the Italians as dirty and criminal, wops and dagos. Both sides had gangs, but only the Italians had the mafia. Its malign star was Al Capone. The mafia extorted, robbed, and murdered those who stood in its way. Prohibition was a godsend to organized crime. Hoboken teemed with gangsters. Alcohol was smuggled into its port. Sinatra's father was a boxer who worked for the bootleggers.
It was rough, really rough. We had everything there. We had the bootleggers there. We had the waterfront tough guys.
His mother, Dolly, was a midwife who dabbled in politics. During Prohibition, they ran a bar. Born in this lawless town, Sinatra grew up to respect power and the gangsters who wielded it.
It was just another form of power, I think.
Because they didn't play by the rules.
Yeah, and he didn't either. They came from subjugated people, from neighborhoods that were poor and had terrible times. But those guys were heroic figures.
Dolly was like a godmother to poor Italians. A passionate Democrat, she won favors for them from politicians at City Hall. She did them quieter favors, too.
You don't like the word abortionist?
Abortion? No. No.
As Italian families saw it, it was abortion as a social service, saving them from disgrace.
Because the father would disown the daughter, he would chase her out of the house. He wouldn't have anything to do with her.
Dolly never let her son forget he was part of a poor Italian minority.
That's America to me.
It was for the poor, for the guy that couldn't fetch for himself.
The worker at my side, the little town or city where my people lived and died.
Actually, the Sinatras were far from poor. Frank was a lonely little boy alternately beaten and smothered with love and toys by his mother.
She earned a lot of money.
And she gave him everything she...
Everything.
He later spoke of himself as a kind of dead-end kid made good. It wasn't quite true. He even had his own account at a clothes store.
And charged everything as his mother paid for it. And he looked the best.
The teenage Sinatra wanted to be a singer.
How ambitious was he?
Very. Very ambitious.
His first recording has lain hidden for 50 years.
The record was in the drawer there.
In the drawer?
I'm here 30 years, in that drawer.
An orchestra leader called Frank Main let him sing on one of his records, but it was never released.
Didn't your husband ever think that this was something he could make a lot of money out of?
No, my husband never thought of money. That's why I'm poor.
Sinatra's dream shone from across the Hudson River.
Because he said to me one day, we're going to go to New York.
At 17, his father threw him out. He headed for the jazz clubs of Manhattan.
Lenox Avenue is known for doing the low down.
Big Crosby was his big guy in his mind. And he said, I want to do that.
Fifth Avenue does it now.
But soon enough, Sinatra was back on the wrong side of the Hudson. He joined a group called the Hoboken Four and went on tour.
We'll shine up to you. Everybody's gonna hide you, dear. You'll make the whole world shine.
They sang in different little taverns, and they'd find a place and they'd work a couple of days.
The man who could make his dreams come true lived in the perfumed splendor of the Waldorf Towers in Manhattan. Lucky Luciano, from the same town in Sicily as the Sinatras, now headed the American Mafia. He controlled the clubs where the stars sang. Dolly Sinatra did all she could for her son. She'd grown up with gangsters. Later, she came to know a mafioso called Jimmy Blue Eyes Allo, who'd known Sinatra since he was a kid.
This is my uncle on the left with Dolly and Marty Sinatra.
Were they close to each other?
Oh, yes.
Allo, in turn, was close to Lucky Luciano.
He said he was a very nice guy. Very nice guy.
According to Luciano, his associates told him that Frank Sinatra was a rising star.
They see those rising stars. They bet them like stocks.
Pianist Chico Scimone has disclosed for the first time that the mob gave Sinatra a secret audition. It was organized by cronies of Lucky Luciano.
Met Luciano, we had lunch together, but this particular...
He came to know Luciano and was trusted to say nothing about the powerful men who would attend.
And next to me there's Lucky, on my right is Lucky.
The details, he says, were in the hands of Luciano's murderous lieutenant, Frank Costello.
There was somebody that was bringing a young boy that had a good voice, and he had some friends coming over to listen to this boy sing.
The friends were other mobsters.
So I played for him, and he sang.
Sinatra, he says, was confident. The mobsters were impressed.
He wasn't panicky or something like that. No. Sang a beautiful song, night and day. Not a giorno.
I think of you day and night, night and day. Why is it so?
Scimone has chosen not to tell his story before.
Never out talk, never, no, never, always. My mouth shut.
The mob saw Sinatra as a potential earner.
Their business is money. It is not personalities, it's not awards, it is money. If he wanted to work in the clubs, he had to work for organized crime because they owned every club. New York, Florida, they owned them all. And they owned the record companies They made the records, they owned the jukeboxes, they told the disc jockeys what song to play on the radio.
He had no choice.
None at all.
A U.S. Bureau of Narcotics document later called Sinatra a front for the big mob. Luciano's henchman, Frank Costello, had helped discover him.
Did Frank know Frank Costello?
Yes, very well.
Pretty powerful people.
Mm-hmm. Very powerful. When anybody can get you killed, they're powerful.
And they could get you killed.
That fast.
Sinatra was trapped in a relationship with the most powerful mafioso of them all, Lucky Luciano.
But you know what you're getting into life. If somebody tells you there's a trap over here and a trap over there, you try to walk in the middle.
So he knew what he was signing up to.
He knew what he was doing at all times.
Broadway, Mazda Lane, the kaleidoscopic pattern of thousands of...
Sinatra, it seemed, didn't want to escape. The mob could give him what he wanted. He admired their dark mystique.
Restaurants, clubs, theaters...
You never stop wanting. What's next?
Until I hear you at the door.
You can't have it all. And he wanted it all.
Saturday night is the loneliest night of the week.
Trumpeter Harry James hired him for a national tour.
Did you feel excited to...
Oh, absolutely. I didn't know what the rush was, but I could feel it, you know.
Sinatra's new wife, Nancy, came along and made the sandwiches.
Until you're in my arms once more.
Soon, he joined bandleader Tommy Dorsey.
Night of the week.
In 1942, he opened solo in Times Square.
New York Paramount Theater.
These thousands of screaming girls, the vibrations in the air, the sound was awesome and frightening.
This was how it began for Frank Sinatra, a man who was to become a legend in his time.
Really, to me, terrifying, because it was inhuman almost. It was, you know, out of the range of anything I'd ever heard before.
I hear music when I look at you.
And I never saw anybody reach and hold an audience the way Frank did.
Down deep in my heart.
Magic.
Exempted from military service in World War II because of a punctured eardrum, Sinatra fought his war from Hollywood. By the end of the war, he was a screen idol.
This is success. People wanting him, personally, sexually.
He'd bring starlets to his apartment high over Los Angeles.
We went inside. The lights were soft and it was beautifully decorated. It was really elegant. Frank was very much into elegance. And the curtains were open. And the whole city, it was a beautiful, clear night. The whole city was just twinkling like a little jewel box. It was so beautiful.
Dreaming of a song.
To be there with Frank Sinatra, I'm 18 years old. He's the king of the world, just about. And I'm with him. And there it is, Hollywood, beckoning.
When our love was
powerful, powerful magic.
And each
His wife, Nancy, was expected to stay home and bear children.
When you have the access to beautiful women, they couldn't resist him. She knew that.
He sang love songs of love lost, as if he'd lived them himself.
The charisma was incredible. He would walk out onto the stage and without opening his mouth to sing one note, the audience was in his hand immediately.
stars were bright,
I'm sure every woman thought he was singing to them, including me. I thought sure that song was for me. Every woman felt that.
Of paradise where roses grew.
Offstage, he could be equally tender.
Very, very romantic. And I'm sure any woman who was ever involved with him would tell you this. Tender, sweet. He did make you feel as if you were the only one in the world.
My stardust melody, the memory of love's refrain.
But the great romantic had a violent temper. A drummer who displeased him was beaten in the street by two men from Hoboken.
The power.
The power, because of his friends that would help him, you know.
More powerful friends came to Sinatra's aid later when he wanted to wriggle out of a contract with bandleader Tommy Dorsey. Dorsey complained that two armed men had come to see him.
So they said, well, I tell you, it caused a little problem because we really need him. And I know you wouldn't want to be dead and not have a contract. So why don't we just now make a good deal?
Did they show their weapons?
Yes, they did. Yes. All I have to do is put the coat back and there's the butt of the gun.
Easy.
So Dorsey was afraid?
Oh, yeah. He said there was nothing in the world I was going to do then.
Give my regards to Martha.
That's how Frank's career zoomed.
Robin Hood.
One of the gunmen was a mafia pal of Frank Sinatra and a powerful associate of Lucky Luciano. Luciano himself was now in jail, his power undiminished, his word law. After the war, he was deported to Italy. Italian police escorted him to the small Sicilian town where he was born. The same town that also spawned the Sinatras, La Cara Freddi. A year later, Sinatra was staying with gangsters Joe, Charles, and Rocco Fischetti at their mansion in Miami.
Rocco Fischetti and Charles Fischetti were the first cousins of Al Capone. They were probably the second heaviest people in crime in Chicago.
They had something to celebrate. Somehow, Luciano had slipped out of Italy. He was in Cuba, just 90 miles away. In those days, poor Cuba was a haven for gangsters. From the island's corrupt politicians, the mafia would buy control of gambling, brothels, even abortion clinics. Every appetite that couldn't be legally satisfied in the United States. Brothers sold their sisters in doorways, while the mafia made a fortune. Banned from the US, this was Luciano's island of dreams. In 1947, a Pan Am clipper flew Frank Sinatra to Havana. He carried a briefcase alleged to contain $2 million.
$16 million today. Why was he carrying it? Who was he carrying it for? Well, he arrived off the plane in the company of two of the Fischetti brothers. And we do know that mafia people were bringing vast sums in cash to Luciano in Cuba.
The allegation was first made by a journalist called Lee Mortimer.
I was accused of bringing to Florida with me a small attaché case, which in fact held sketching pads, crayons, and such. And Mr. Lee Mortimer, who was probably one of the most vicious men in the media in the world, said that I went to Cuba with $2 million in an attaché case. And what I said was, if you can fit it in the case, I'll give you the $2 million.
His explanations didn't stand up. Sinatra became, along the way, quite a good painter. But his wife, Nancy, said that he took up art only somewhat after the expedition to Cuba.
US agents believed Luciano needed vast sums of money to develop new casinos and drug routes. In this hotel, Luciano had called a mafia summit.
It had to be you.
A hotel employee remembers Luciano and Sinatra swimming together, evidently on the best of terms.
And finally found the summer.
Luciano lavishly entertained Sinatra and powerful mobsters. Cuba truly was a gangster's paradise. They were beyond US law. Wined and dined by Luciano, Sinatra claimed he didn't quite know who he was. Any report I fraternize with goons and racketeers is a vicious lie, he said. That isn't quite how it seemed to the hotel's head waiter, Jorge.
Sinatra said it wasn't true, but it was true. I know because I served them.
Officially, Luciano stayed in room 724. Actually, it was occupied by bodyguards. Luciano was so afraid of assassination that he had his own private lift to the second floor, where he stayed next to Sinatra.
Here in this room, during the Mafia reunion, was Frank Sinatra.
Sinatra shared a small living area with Luciano and the mob's financial brain, Meyer Lansky.
Lucky Luciano was in that room, alone. And here, in 213, was Meyer Lansky.
The room faced north. The U.S., barred to Luciano, was just across the water.
You know nothing more than what you told the boy.
I never gave Mr. Luciano anything. I shook hands with him in a dining room in a hotel in Havana.
Frank Sinatra, Lucky Luciano, and Meyer Lansky, the three of them together. The majority of times, when I served them, there were just those three. When I'd go in, and they'd be talking together, they'd change the subject. They thought I spoke good English and was going to listen to what they were talking about, so they'd change the subject. They'd say practically nothing. They waited for me to serve breakfast, and I'd leave immediately.
I get no kick from champagne.
How much Sinatra knew, we don't know.
Mere alcohol.
We do know that on Luciano's agenda was what to do about a mobster called Ben Bugsy Siegel, who'd stepped out of line.
He'd apparently bungled the opening of a major casino in Las Vegas and was also allegedly embezzling money from his fellow mobsters, including Sinatra's friends, the Fischettis. Well, you don't get away with that in the mob.
Siegel had built the Flamingo Casino in Las Vegas with mob money, some of which had disappeared.
So the word went out, kill him.
That's correct. The word was that Siegel had stolen.
Sinatra knew Siegel fairly well. And what happened next would reveal a curious side to Sinatra's nature. A woman called Virginia Hill lived with Siegel in Beverly Hills.
Virginia Hill was the saucy actress, in quotes, who was basically the bed partner of many, many mafia dons in those days.
The mafia believed she was making regular money runs to Switzerland, depositing their cash in a secret bank account. One day, Siegel went to the barber, then took a walk with another mobster, Alan Smiley.
And they went back to Ben's house, you know, to read the paper, you know, probably look at the results of the track or whatever. And they were sitting on the sofa in the living room.
I know from the way that world works that he would have gotten warnings, he would have gotten back channel warnings to be very careful because people are very upset.
What Siegel didn't know was that waiting outside was an assassin, sent, by one account, by Sinatra's friend, Charles Fischetti.
All of a sudden, around 10 o'clock, just the whole window just shattered.
Someone came up to some lattice work outside, propped up a carbine, and blew his head off. Blew one of his eyes all the way across the room. Lights out for Benny.
What were his injuries? What had happened to him?
His injuries were undescribable. I mean, he was just shattered. His whole face, everything. It was just, it's horrible, horrible. I think it was 16 bullets went through him, smashed them all up.
On some bizarre impulse, Sinatra insisted on taking his then-girlfriend to toast Siegel's memory.
And we went to the house and sat in the house, and it was eerie. It was really, there was such an aura of violence when you walked in that was still kind of hanging in the air.
They sat on the bloody sofa on which Siegel died, drinking champagne.
Seems a rather gruesome thing to do, to go and sit in the room where the man was murdered.
I've thought about that, yeah. I don't think that was part of it, although you never know. Frank was many layers of a person. And maybe that was part of it. Maybe there was a ghoulish kind of attraction.
To his valet, Sinatra seemed indifferent to mafia violence.
They were always finding these bodies.
But Sinatra was around all these people and all this stuff. Didn't it bother him?
No, I don't think so. He didn't pay attention. He used to think it was all make-believe, you know.
Liver Lips Louie, Angie the Ox.
Of course, you'd think about it if you knew people and then they got killed and all these people died in different times and different ways.
But it didn't seem to upset him unduly.
No, not at all.
Frank Sinatra has amazed the entertainment world with his dramatic prowess.
I think he was a gangster at heart. He wasn't a gangster in fact, in my opinion. He was just a gangster at heart.
Adelaide, Adelaide, ever-loving Adelaide.
In the years that followed, his relationship with Luciano survived. Checking into a hotel in Rome, Sinatra's valet was shocked to see Luciano sitting motionless in the shadows. Luciano rose and kissed Sinatra. For a moment, he wondered if it was the kiss of death.
He said, what's he doing here? He was waiting for him to come. He knew he was coming to town, so Lucky was sitting up there waiting for him, just to say hello. Boy, it scared the shit out of him and everybody else, didn't it?
My funny Valentine, sweet comic Valentine.
Until the day Luciano died, Sinatra, it seemed, would continue to take huge risks for him.
Reports came into the FBI for years after the Cuba episode that Sinatra was carrying money to Luciano in Italy, as he supposedly had, to Cuba.
Unphotographable.
The mob could make an entertainer.
Yet you're my favorite.
But the stench of organized crime could also help break him.
Sinatra was dead wrong if he thought that his cavorting with Lucky Luciano in Cuba was going to escape public notice.
He was on a downward spiral that would almost finish him.
William Randolph Hearst was the only man ever able to indulge...
Newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst liked neither Sinatra's mob connections nor his politics.
...fighting giant of journalism with all his vast collection.
Hearst was a virulent anti-communist. Sinatra, a well-known liberal.
What's he got, smallpox or something?
We don't like
His short film, The House I Live In, preached racial and religious harmony.
Now, hold on. God created everybody. He didn't create one people better than another.
To the Hearst papers, Sinatra was a hypocrite. They derided the news that he was to play a priest in his next movie. He was just trying to clean up his image as the thug's chum, they said. Sinatra beat up a Hearst columnist in a nightclub. Hollywood studios were losing patience. Sinatra's films were beginning to flop. Double Dynamite lost a fortune.
Imagine Frank Sinatra handling...
A show business paper asked, is Sinatra finished?
I've come to take you away with me, to carry you over the border or someplace where we can be together. We've dilly-dallied long enough.
Pennies in a stream, falling leaves, a sycamore.
His wife Nancy remembered him going off alone to Palm Springs for days on end, solitary and silent.
I see finger away.
Their 10th wedding anniversary was just a month away when Sinatra began the pursuit of a woman who would destroy it all.
She was bold and beautiful, desired by every man who met her. This one risked disaster.
Hollywood star Ava Gardner was as profane and hard-drinking as Sinatra.
And this one killed to win her.
Their relationship would emotionally destroy him.
Pandora destroyed all who loved her until she met the Flying Dutchman.
Good, gorgeous. She was something else. I loved her. She was very decent, but she could swear like a sailor. She talked this like some guy in the Navy.
A first date was not auspicious.
because she said he had a gun and he loved to shoot at things, you know.
Near Palm Springs, he fired a revolver out of the car window. He said it was target practice.
And that kind of frightened her a little bit.
She understood his insecurities, which made him often very arrogant and difficult.
Birds gotta fly.
He was so much in love with her, you wouldn't believe it.
Love one man till I die.
Because she was loved by everybody, she wanted everything just like him. He met, so to speak, his Waterloo.
He was jealous over Ava's popularity.
Her star was rising, his falling.
They could have a fight over a cup of coffee, get up in the morning and have a cup of coffee, and, you know, and the doors are slamming and the fight's on.
And he would get on this tirade about Ava Gardner. She called me a hoodlum. Called me a hoodlum, and she called me as well. And he must have loved it, you know.
But if I feel your heart.
He sang to half-empty houses.
I used to watch him. I'm not ashamed to say it. I used to cry because to hear a man and see some people walking out would kill me.
Willow, weep for me.
He was tormented by Ava's infidelity.
He had lost it. Fear, nerves, and he'd have to stop rehearsing. He had no will.
Few besides mafia-controlled clubs would employ him.
He couldn't get a job to save his life, and they were there for him. And he was loyal to them and didn't ask questions about what they did.
Even the mafia boss of New Jersey, Willie Moretti, told Sinatra to go back to his wife.
Gone, my lover's dream.
He phoned Ava from a hotel in New York to say goodbye.
She says, goodbye, where you going? She said, where I'm going, you can't come. So she got alarmed. Then she heard a pistol shot. Loud. This was in the hotel room. It's 4:30 a.m.
Hear me, Willow.
Then they walk in and there he is in bed, snoozing peacefully. They found out the next day he'd fired a shot into the mattress.
On Valentine's Day, his wife Nancy announced their marriage was over. Afraid of scandal, MGM wanted Gardner and Sinatra to marry fast. Sinatra's mafia pal, Willie Moretti, was no longer in a position to restrain him. They flew south on honeymoon. They forgot their luggage. Sinatra was sliding into an abyss, making a record so bad that Ava cringed.
She would say, Rainey, let's go upstairs and play the records and pretend we like them.
I believe, I believe, I believe.
He thought that we really liked it, and she was just trying to boost his ego, you know. She would do things like that.
I believe, I believe.
A Columbia Records executive called him a has-been.
You managed to borrow.
Ava went to Kenya to shoot a film called Magambo.
Magambo, the new word in motion picture entertainment.
Sinatra went with her.
You literally bought him his ticket?
Yep.
Africa, known for centuries as the white man's graveyard.
He was completely broke.
They padlocked his Palm Springs house, his office, his everything. He lost everything.
I warn you. I'm looking, I'm searching, I really am.
It was the worst time of all. There were rows and jealousy.
She said, oh, I know he'll come back up. I know I have to get free of him, but I know he'll come back up. I can't do it while he's down. And had she left him, he would have been totally finished.
In 1952, Ava flew to London to abort his baby. He went off alone to a beach hotel on the Indian Ocean, where he was seen picking out a tune on a piano by the sea, unshaven, lost.
During that time, everything was hard for him. So it was just out of one hardship into another.
Nobody knew what was in his mind, whether this time he really might walk off into the waves.
He's had everything, all this money, all this power, and now it's gone.
That's right.
There was an old ballad Sinatra liked. Where will you sleep when the nighttime comes? What do you do when your heart's in pain? Where will you run?
He says murder, he says. Every time we're kids, he says murder, he says.
Luckily, Sinatra did still have somewhere to run, to the men who'd helped make him.
He says solid, he says. Takes him in his arms and says solid, he says.
The mafia's man in Hollywood was the suave Johnny Rosselli.
He was powerful, enigmatic, sweet, gentle, but he could switch like that.
He says murder, he says. Every time we kiss, he says murder, he says. Keep it up like this.
Columbia Pictures had turned Sinatra down for a part in an epic movie they were planning about World War II.
He knew that part would make him.
So it seems, Rosselli took decisive action.
Frank convinced John that this would revive his career, which would be good for Chicago and the mob and everything else.
The mafia wielded power in Hollywood. They held film unions in their grip. Rosselli asked for a meeting with Harry Cohn, the head of Columbia Pictures.
And he just told Harry Cohn, you don't have a choice. Frank's going in the picture and that's it. And that's the way it worked out.
And Rosselli told you this himself?
Yes, he did.
Before his death, Fred Zinnemann, the film's director, told me the story wasn't true, but he may not have known. Cohn's widow confirmed it. Other evidence, too, supports the story that Rosselli told.
Cohn was afraid of him.
Oh, yeah.
Afraid of Johnny
Well,
Rosselli.
afraid of his power. Yeah.
To shut everything down.
Easy. He could have done it very easily.
The film was called From Here to Eternity. Sinatra played the part of Maggio, a scrappy little man with a chip on his shoulder.
Who's the broad?
It's my sister.
What he desperately wanted now was an Oscar.
Nobody's going to do nothing.
And he just said he was going to go and say a prayer just before the Oscars had started.
Was he a religious man?
No, not at all. I think he went to church twice the whole time I was with him.
At Hollywood's Pantages Theater, it's the motion picture industry's night of nights.
He'd been resurrected by the mafia.
The winner is Frank Sinatra.
Frank Sinatra wins another of the 8 Oscars captured by the film, as he is named the top male supporting player.
He was so overjoyed, he was frightened. He was tears in his eyes when he went up to get it.
I'm terribly pleased, and if I start thanking everybody, I'll do a one-reeler up here, so I better not.
Amongst those he didn't thank was Johnny Rosselli. That night, he wandered alone through Beverly Hills, clutching his Oscar.
And that's when I think Frank realized power is it in Hollywood. It doesn't matter money, it's power.
He was happy, rich again, powerful again, and crazy again.
The mob made him again.
Yes, yes, always.
He went from the very bottom to the top.
Back to the top.
The mafia even offered him shares in a new casino in Las Vegas.
It had to be you.
Sinatra's old mafia pal Frank Costello was involved.
I wandered around and finally found.
Alone, the mob had stuck by him.
Now he was very viable.
So this wasn't an act of kindness, giving poor Frank a chance. It was a way to enhance their asset, their investment.
That's another way of saying, okay, now we owe you a little bit more than you owe us, my friend. You owe us big.
Reports reaching federal agencies said that mobsters were the owners of Sinatra.
So he could draw people into the casinos.
Not only that, but he also could do favors for the mob. When they open a place in Chicago, who's going to open on opening night? Frank Sinatra.
The old magic returned. The voice was back.
He was fantastic. A different human being, a different body, a different personality.
When somebody loves you, it's no good unless he loves you.
There was nothing phony in Frank's delivery. He sang heartbreak, and you knew that heartbreak was for real.
Phrasing, impeccable. Intonation, impeccable.
That was his position in life. Using a song, telling a story.
Taller than the tallest tree is.
You listened. There was a reason for what he was saying.
And then he'd begin to sing, and it was magic time.
Deeper than the deep blue sea is. That's how deep it goes, if it's real.
Some thought the magic came from Ava.
When somebody needs you, it's no good unless he needs you. All the way.
Finally, inevitably, he'd lost her.
And most of his love songs were dedicated like to Ava. He sang songs that were touching. It was almost like singing directly to her.
It ain't gaining any ground.
What was his name for Ava?
Angel.
Because my angel eyes.
But she was the one who was in the dreams all the time. Daydreams, night dreams.
Angel eyes.
In one of their more bitter encounters, she asked him to pay back some money he owed her. He went to the bank and got it all out in $1 bills.
She said, the son of a bitch had all that money in bills and said, here's your fucking money, and threw it on the floor.
His home had become a shrine to Ava.
Misspent with angel eyes tonight.
He'd weep in front of her pictures or shoot at them with an air gun. Hookers and starlets trooped in and out.
Make him forget, I suppose. Because he was a very lonely man by himself. He wouldn't say very much when he was alone. He'd either read or stare at the television.
But Sinatra had a new infatuation, Sam Giancana, one of the darkest stars of the underworld. Crime boss of Chicago, Giancana's power extended from Cuba to Vegas to Hollywood. Earlier, Lucky Luciano had assigned him to look after Sinatra.
Giancana was brought in really quite early on to deal with heavy things, important things to do with Sinatra's career.
Giancana took over. See, one thing about these people, that if they own businesses and they pass on, the business stays with the people that take it over next. That's the way it works.
I've got you under my skin.
Film star Yul Brynner and his son would later go on holiday with Sinatra and Giancana.
He looked like a cantaloupe that had gone bad and kind of collapsed on itself. There was nothing pretty about Sam Giancana.
I've got you.
This was Frank Sinatra's new pal.
Sam was, he'd kill you. He'd torture you, cut you open, cut your throat, beat the shit out of you until you wish you were dead.
Perfect gentleman, sure. Frank loved him.
But he was also a torturer. Cut people in half.
But I don't know what went in Frank's mind, but I know he loved the guy.
Giancana came to the set of Some Came Running with Sinatra, Shirley MacLaine, and Dean Martin.
You'll miss the bestest pal.
One night after filming, the 24-year-old MacLaine playfully pulled a water pistol on Giancana. He reached for his gun.
And just at that moment, Dean and Frank walked in the kitchen and saw me pulling a toy pistol on Sam Giancana and Giancana pulling a .38 on me. They laughed, they went down on their knees. You know how they used to laugh? Like they had a terrible hernia. They would laugh. They really meant it, though. And they say, she's okay, Sam. She's just a kid. She's all right.
Come fly with me, we'll fly with you.
Sinatra and Giancana were exhilarated by each other's power.
Maybe Giancana loved Sinatra's celebrity, and Sinatra loved Giancano's reputation.
Come fly with me, we'll float down to Peru.
These were people who didn't follow the rules. They made their own rules.
In time, they'd open a casino together, the Calneva Lodge on the Rocky Heights over Lake Tahoe.
Up there, it's another world. It was like next to God. It's just beautiful.
God in this case was Sam Giancana, Sinatra's secret investor.
Petrified once I get.
He'd fly up on Sinatra's plane.
We always had him on the manifest as Dr. Sam Mooney. He was very cold.
The last stage of the journey was by helicopter. Giancana would always look immaculate.
But nobody would talk about it. They feared him.
Why did they fear him?
They knew he was a close friend of Frank's, and they knew Frank didn't want anybody to know he was there. This was Frank's place.
Giancana was banned from Nevada casinos. The Calneva had a huge advantage. It was on the state line between California and Nevada. The chalets were in California, the casino in Nevada.
Half the swimming pool was in California, half the swimming pool was in Nevada. You gotta watch where you swim.
If you're a mobster.
If you're a mobster.
A secret tunnel led from Sinatra's chalet to the casino. Giancana would sneak across.
In regard to associations between performers and nefarious characters, it's not true that actors seek them out. They have sought out actors for years. I never had a business dealing with anybody except legitimate people.
According to his pilot, Sinatra's plane would fly bags of cash out of the Calneva.
They would be counting money in stacks, not bills. They were counting stacks.
After Fidel Castro seized power in Cuba, the mafia and its casinos had been ousted.
Then the temper of the throng changed, and an ugly mob ranged the streets. Its prime targets, the symbols of the overthrown regime.
The new Havana was Las Vegas. And Frank Sinatra was its star of stars.
He was a king to somebody like me.
Very much, very kind.
Close up, he was mesmerizing.
Sinatra was standing a foot away from me. They put the light on, and he'll turn to the guy and say, "Let's go to work."
She gets hungry for dinner at 8. Loves the theater, doesn't come late. She'd never bother.
And this guy, who's just created a silence, walks through the audience, and they are going, "Wow, he is here. It is him. It's magic."
Doesn't like crap games with the barons and earls. Will not go to Harlem dressed up in ermine and pearls. She won't dish the dirt with the rest of those girls. That's why this chick is a tramp.
Now at the height of his power, he was drawing thousands of punters into mob-run casinos to lose their money to the mafia.
He helped to bring glamour to some things that really are not all that glamorous. Sinatra was an integral character in bringing people out to Las Vegas at a time when most of them would not have gone had they known that killers owned a piece of the operation. But they'd go to see Frank Sinatra.
She gets much too hungry, babe.
I think he was the publicity department for the mob.
She adores the theater.
Sinatra may have been one of the richest, most powerful entertainers in the world, but he still took orders from the mafia.
The root of it is to separate the sucker from the green.
There's no feelings here, there's no character here, there's no love for anything but money.
Doesn't dig dice games played with a gang of sharpies and frauds.
When a gambler had a big win, the mob ordered Sinatra onto the casino floor.
this certain person in New York called Sinatra and told him to get up out of bed, get your fucking toupee on, get down there, and do your fucking job.
His job in this case was to keep the winner playing until he lost.
Frank went in, sat down, and over the next few hours, we got all our money back. And by the way, the guy loved it, just to sit and play baccarat with Sinatra.
Hey, California, because it's
Sinatra was king, lord of his universe. His word was law, his mood swings, spectacular.
Totally strange person.
He was Jekyll and Hyde.
He was a controller, and he made sure everybody knew that.
He could be incredibly generous. Other times he humiliated waiters or croupiers.
He would proceed to insult you in the most debased terms, scream at you, yell at you, throw cards in your face, and you just had to stand there and take it.
Bodyguards protected him.
He got in many a fight, you know, arguments.
Did people get hurt?
Sometimes.
Badly hurt?
Yes.
Showgirls were invited to long dinners in a restaurant run by Tony Montana.
When he gets juiced or whatever his attitude was, or whoever bid him wrong or said something to him wrong, he jump all over him. He call him a whore, you pig. And these girls, they knew better. They're dancers. They're showgirls. If they said anything out of line, they wouldn't be working. You can't interfere. You can't tell them, Mr. Sinatra, would you behave? Mr. Sinatra, would you can't do that.
Because there was always this threat that his actions were covered by those above us.
They call me in.
The mob.
The booze brought out these dragons, and these dragons tend to show me that he was probably afraid of something. And that's why he would act aggressively, to face off everything, to make sure that he was still in power and in control and that it wasn't going away.
Sinatra and his Rat Pack had the world at their feet. For a brief shining moment, they glistened like a mirage in the Nevada desert. They were what every American male aspired to be, effortlessly cool.
You're sitting there partying and carrying on with the coolest guys in the world, you know, that every day everybody was looking up to and talking about.
The press called it the Rat Pack Summit. By day, they filmed Ocean's 11 about a casino heist in Las Vegas. By night, they played at the Sands, where the Mafia and Sinatra were investors.
could have danced all night.
So this was really the absolute peak of Frank's power.
Absolutely.
Have begged for more.
Every night was a party.
Could have spread my wings.
You're talking about human beings who have an electricity and a charisma to them that's visible.
Done before. I'll never know what made it so exciting. But all at once.
Women adored them.
They laid down in front of him. There was a shower of hotel keys.
What, they threw their keys?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Panties, too.
I could have done.
Staff were under mob orders not to spill the beans on their famous guests.
Kept your mouth shut.
Whatever you saw.
Absolutely.
And what would you see?
I don't think they held back anything there.
There were 4 or 5 in bed all the time.
So if somebody wanted a fantasy to come true, you could make it come true.
We specialize in that.
The sauna at the Sands was a magnet for hookers.
And they had tables set up, and if you were at the big game, they had a couple of girls circulating underneath the table to satisfy you sexually while you were playing cards.
But the life of Frank Sinatra was about to change profoundly. In 1960, the man who would be president arrived in Las Vegas. Jack Kennedy joined Sinatra at the Sands.
Sinatra and JFK, both of them there.
JFK, yeah, sure. And that's how Frank would impress them.
He wanted to come for what Vegas was known for, which is women, partying, and a good time. He knows that if he's with Frank, you just have to ask. If Frank asks, you get it.
He would come out to the hotel
And he was safe here.
You mean he could get away with anything?
Anything.
Nobody would ever tell?
Never.
But Sinatra would live to regret his relationship with JFK. It would lead to humiliation, even a threat to his life. But there was no hint of that in the heady days of 1960. Kennedy needed star endorsement, and he got it from the Rat Pack.
How'd it come off? Like a charm. Same here, fantastic. I'm not a ferry boat, I'm a very...
It was one-stop shopping. Peter Lawford was his brother-in-law,
What happens when they speak?
and Sammy Davis was black.
I knew this color would come in handy one day.
He could help Kennedy prove his racial bona fides.
How do you get the stuff off? Well, what I usually...
Davis remarked, "My role was, let Sammy take care of all the ethnic people." And Frank Sinatra, he had something even better, a connection to the mafia.
Did you have a pleasant stay, Sam? How's the privilege of Chicago, Sam?
His friend Giancana, Kennedy's father believed, could help deliver votes in the upcoming election. Earlier, the Kennedys had sent an emissary to see gangster Jimmy Allo, looking for a way to get to Giancana.
Because they knew that Chicago was going to be crucial in the election.
You mean he wanted somebody to make a connection with Sam Giancana in Chicago?
Mm-hmm. And so my uncle said, no, I don't get involved in politics.
So who became the connection?
Well, I only know what I hear. Evidently, Sinatra became the connection.
Jack Kennedy had visited Sinatra in Palm Springs. So had his father, Joe.
He wanted his son to be the president of the United States. And there was nothing he wouldn't do to make this happen.
He had a message for Sam Mo Giancana.
Chicago, Chicago, a toddler.
The messenger would be Frank Sinatra.
Chicago, Chicago, I'll show you around.
In the tough Chicago wards they influenced, Joe wanted the mafia to turn out votes for his son.
So Sinatra approached Mo, I call him Mo, and told him what they would do for us if his son got in office, which is big.
In return, Giancana expected he'd get an easy ride from the White House.
So you figure if we got a president in our pocket, we got it made.
The time of my life.
And what did Giancana think he could get out of this new relationship that he saw developing?
A great contact with the President of the United States.
Via Frank Sinatra?
Of course.
As Giancana fondly imagined, it would be springtime for mobsters. Sinatra rounded up celebrities to attend Kennedy's nomination in Los Angeles.
Frank genuinely thought this guy will become an intelligent, great man for our country.
But the new frontier of which I speak is not a set of promises. It is a set of challenges.
I stood next to Dean Martin when he told Frank, they're gonna fuck you.
The Kennedys?
Yeah. He said, Frank, you don't know what the fuck you're doing.
But Sinatra hoped Kennedy would sweep away injustice, which he'd seen at first hand. In the recent past, black entertainers in Las Vegas hadn't been allowed to stay in the hotels where they performed.
Some of the very famous African-American stars, like Sammy Davis when they started out, they had to live in a trailer behind a hotel.
I mean, it was horrible. They would be called and told when to come on stage, and after the stage, back to the trailer. I mean, like little piglets and little animals.
To gamble, they'd had to go to a black casino.
Frank was the first one to make Sammy Davis Jr. register in the hotel. And they did it.
He started that. He'd say, I will burn the hotel down if you don't hire him.
Strangely, Sinatra was guilty of racist outbursts.
He's a very complex individual. Race is almost up there with him. The same man who might call a guy, a black nigger, will travel cross-country to do a benefit for a black school.
But his faith in Jack Kennedy was simple and sincere, that he would change America. As Election Day dawned, Giancana sent out his mafia soldiers to rouse votes for Kennedy.
So we went out and we hustled all these people to do it and tell them what could be done and what would be done if Kennedy got into office. And they all went out and voted.
They put the man in the White House.
That's what they thought.
Well, they did. If they couldn't get Illinois, he would have never won.
Kennedy scraped in by 0.1%.
Frank kept waiting for Nixon to concede. And he called the hotel and said, "Tell the son of a bitch to concede."
Mr. Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, will be the next president of the United States.
Victory, Giancana believed, belonged to him. He turned out thousands of votes. Many of them he'd bought.
Giancana was in a position to think and believe, and accurately believe, that but for the work that he had done, but for the money he had put in the election, Richard Nixon would have been president.
Sinatra set about organizing the inaugural gala.
You're just too marvelous for words. Like a glory.
He wanted to be ambassador to Italy.
He had the taste of Italy in his mouth. He wanted to be ambassador. Why, I don't know.
I'll never find.
Stars and gangsters alike celebrated Kennedy's victory.
I said, we got it made now. That's what all of us guys were sitting in a bar and we're all laughing. We got it made now.
Giancana likewise looked forward to favors from the Kennedys. Not only had he helped put them in office, he was part of a madcap CIA plot to kill Fidel Castro. He and Sinatra hung out at a hotel in Miami where Giancana met spies and Cuban exiles to plan Castro's murder. If they succeeded, the mob might get back its Cuban casinos. The very last thing they expected was this.
I think that in the field of organized crime, I think it's a very serious situation that's facing the country at the present time.
Bobby Kennedy's appointment as Attorney General was bad news for Giancana and for Sinatra. Bobby declared war on organized crime. Instead of getting the free ride he expected, Giancana would soon be put under round-the-clock surveillance.
No comment.
He felt he'd been double-crossed.
No comment.
He tried to reason with the FBI.
No comment.
When we have a meeting on this, get in contact with Sinatra, let him talk to Kennedy. We ought to be able to work this out. None of that worked.
In the warm glow of victory, Sinatra had invited the president to visit his Palm Springs home. He'd spent a fortune transforming it into a Western White House.
And he had the pool moved over to in front of the big house. The tennis courts were open. Everything was, the helicopter port was built in New York. Everything was prepared for it. We had enough maids for each house. And then they didn't show up. They went over to Bing Crosby's place.
Peter Lawford, the president's brother-in-law, arrived at the house.
And he said, "Frank, JFK can't make it." Frank just grabbed him, pulled him by the neck, threw him down the stairs.
He never spoke to Lawford again after that. He said, threw all of his clothes out in the street, and I threw all his golf club, everything out in the middle of the street.
His ties to the mafia had been an asset to the Kennedys' campaign. Now he represented danger.
To be kicked out like that was a tragedy.
Hounded by the law, Giancana had blamed his middleman, Frank Sinatra. FBI bugs overheard Giancana say,
"I might have known this guy would fuck me."
In the mob's eyes, he'd promised much and delivered nothing.
And when he failed his mission, you know, that was brutal.
Film director Mel Shavelson went to see Sinatra at a hotel in Miami.
And there were 4 or 5 very doubtful characters sitting around the room. And they stared at us and said, "What do you want?" I said, "Well, we want to see Frank. We're going to talk to him about a movie." They said, "You sure?" We said, "Yeah, he invited us." They said, "No, you're not, because he will not talk to anybody."
Sinatra was locked in his bedroom. The men were bodyguards. They'd ordered from room service. Shavelson discovered what had been sent up.
and there was a tray on which there was a silver tureen with a top on it. And this is what came up from the kitchen. And you lifted the top of the tureen, and it was a shaved head of a lamb, which is a mafia symbol for death.
Hey, that's life. That's what all the people say. You riding high in April, shot down in May.
Certainly, Giancana's patience with Sinatra was wearing thin. He was about to lose him the Calneva Lodge. Investigators came to the Calneva looking for mobsters. Sinatra phoned the head of the Nevada Gaming Control Board, Ed Olson.
Pretty much making it clear that he was bigger than the state of Nevada and didn't have to follow our rules.
At the board's office, listening in to the call, Farmer couldn't believe what he heard.
Sinatra said if Olson continued to pursue the investigation, that Sinatra threatened a big fat surprise.
A big fat surprise?
A big fat surprise.
He didn't think Sinatra meant the surprise would be in court.
No, I don't think so.
Some other kind of surprise?
What other kind of surprise do you have in mind?
I'm asking you.
No, I just think of the fat surprise as a threat of some kind of physical violence, something like that. That's the only kind of fat surprise I'm thinking of.
The board charged him with threatening a state official. Knowing the writing was on the wall, Sinatra threw in his Nevada gambling licenses.
I think he knew we had the goods on him. I think we had him.
Luckily for him, the scrutiny would go no higher. He was too embarrassing to the Kennedys.
I have 30,000 associates in 11
At
buildings.
Bobby Kennedy's Justice Department, a young attorney had tried unsuccessfully to open an investigation of Frank Sinatra.
Did you feel you were being blocked?
Well, certainly I was not being authorized to proceed as I thought we should.
And where do you think the block was? Who was stopping you?
Ultimately, it had to be the Attorney General.
Bobby Kennedy?
Yes.
Bobby had been critical to his brother's election.
If we had opened an investigation on Sinatra, it would have been politically devastating to JFK, I would suppose.
Sinatra had escaped investigation by the Justice Department and the wrath of Sam Giancana, but the days were growing cold for the King of Las Vegas.
But 3 quick shots shattered this day, November 22nd, 1963.
In Dallas, the man he'd most admired had been assassinated.
The president's car is now going past me. Now
The Kennedys didn't invite him to the funeral. He'd already been too much of an embarrassment, Peter Lawford said.
Scared, I was a little bit nervous, naturally.
2 weeks later, his son Frankie was briefly snatched by kidnappers. Even Las Vegas, Sinatra's own place, was changing. The old mob-run casinos would soon be out, corporate America in.
I put the sweat of my life into
Reclusive billionaire Howard Hughes began a buying spree.
Besides the Desert Inn, Hughes has purchased the Sands Hotel, the huge new Frontier Hotel.
He wanted to make sure that he was the biggest of all. He did not want anyone to compare in size to him. And he didn't pay much attention to what was happening in the world of entertainment.
So he didn't particularly care if Frank Sinatra stayed or went?
He could not have cared less.
Hughes decreed there should be no more credit for entertainers at the Sands.
Here he is in his place that he helped build, and this hermit is telling him he can't get credit. You know what it is not to give credit to Frank Sinatra? This is nuts.
Drunk, Sinatra drove a golf cart through a window at the Sands, then later attacked its vice president, Carl Cohen.
Emptied the table on him. Carl got up and punched his teeth out. They were all over the floor of the, and that was the last time we ever were at the Sands. We went from there right to Caesar's Palace.
He'd gone too far. To the mob, he was a runaway train.
Got the message to him, tell that guy out there to behave himself.
If he didn't behave himself, what was going to happen to him?
Somebody will make sure he'll behave himself.
And howling up the strip was a new threat to Sinatra's career. The 60s. It wasn't just rock and roll. It was Vietnam.
My daddy in bed dying.
What he couldn't understand was that a whole new generation of people loved that music, that it spoke to us.
Sinatra did not speak to the Vietnam generation.
Just too smart, you know, too well-dressed. That was so hip prior to the Vietnam generation.
In his uncreased tuxedo, Sinatra had seemed Mr. Cool. Vietnam changed all that.
You knew that the stake had been driven into the heart of all of that Vegas thing.
Pandemonium paid a visit. Soon after arriving in America, the Beatles had the top 5 singles.
First of all, we're bringing out the Stamp Out Detroit campaign.
You know, the Beatles were nothing compared to his popularity.
And then suddenly...
That's it. They take the rug out from under you.
Who is Frank Sinatra? Well, let me tell you who Frank Sinatra is. I hope the Beatles in 20 years...
His marriage to actress Mia Farrow did nothing to roll back time. She was 21.
Well, Mia was out on the coast, and I had to come out anyway.
He kept saying he was going to marry her, so he got his secretary to get a ring for her. To me, she was like just another kid.
Dean Martin said he had whiskey older than she was.
It was a little bit like what Ava said. I always knew you'd fall in love with a 12-year-old boy.
The marriage didn't last. She took the hippie trail to India. He came to terms with being a middle-aged man with arthritic fingers.
He wanted respect from the whole world, which he had.
A man full of anger.
Much anger.
Sinatra gave millions to charity. He talked of retiring. Paul Anka wrote the lyrics to a song that became his anthem.
And now the end is near, so I face the final curtain.
The first time he told me he was going to retire, you know, where he was getting tired of it, the press and the government and the mafia stuff, that started to really, I think, annoy him.
I've lived a life that's full of blue eyes.
It was the cry of a man who stood no criticism, but asked no praise.
You know, he's this dual guy. There's a side of him that's a very gentle, caring man.
I did it
You know, he had a heart. I know a lot of people that he helped, many entertainers that he bailed out.
Perhaps you knew when I bit off.
Like with Sammy Davis and all, when Sammy lost his eye and Frank was the first one there, anything he could do, put him in a hospital, take care of him, you know.
The celebrities who packed the LA Music Center in June 1971 couldn't quite believe Frank Sinatra was retiring.
Right smack dab in the middle of the picture is Frank Sinatra.
Any more than they could believe he was still entangled with the mafia.
Is this individual here, the heavyset?
An embarrassing picture surfaced showing an aging Sinatra with leading mafia figures.
Now, immediately to the left of Martian is Carlo Gambino.
The picture had been taken at a theater in upstate New York.
And was at that time probably the most powerful mobster in the country.
A mob associate in Palm Springs had been overheard on the phone ordering Sinatra to sing there.
Frank, I don't give a fuck what you gotta do. You be there.
Did Sinatra have any excuse for how this picture had been taken?
I mean, the only explanation I was aware of was that he said that he was backstage. Lots of people were coming back to have their photographs taken with him, and all of a sudden, all of these guys came walking into his room, put their arms around him, and posed for a photograph.
I wouldn't know their reputation. I'm not about to ask for a sputum test because it would embarrass everybody.
And they all just happened to be the leading mobsters in the United States?
Just happened to be there and happened to be the leading mobsters in the United States, correct.
One by one, his friends in the mob had died or lost their power to protect him. At his home in Chicago, Sam Giancana had been cooking sausages, by some accounts, for a trusted friend.
Summoned to appear before the church committee, Chicago gangster Sam Giancana claimed poor health.
A few days later, he'd been due to testify in Washington at hearings into the CIA plots to kill Fidel Castro.
Present himself in Washington on June 24th.
His trust in his friend was misplaced. One bullet found its way into Giancana's head, 6 into his chin. A warning of what happens to people who talk. A year later, Johnny Rosselli, the man who allegedly got Sinatra his part in From Here to Eternity, was found chopped up in an oil drum floating off Miami. Sinatra built a mountain retreat above Palm Springs. Guards lined the perimeter.
I try to think that love's not around, but it's uncomfortably near.
He'd married a former showgirl called Barbara Marx.
It ain't gaining any ground,
To the last, he tried to persuade Ava Gardner to come back to him.
because my angel eyes ain't here.
So she said she felt that Barbara would be the best thing for Frank.
In his old age.
And she told him, said, Barbara, stay with him. She says, you know I won't.
Ronald Reagan interrupted his presidential campaign to attend the wedding. Humiliated by the Democrats, Sinatra had swung his political support behind the Republican right. 3 weeks after Reagan's inauguration, he again got a gambling license in Nevada.
They slobbered all over him when he came in.
Let me begin by saying that I never invited Mr. Giancana to La Calneva. I never hosted for him, and I never saw him at Calneva.
Well, it's a lie. We knew that was a lie. Of course he hosted Giancana. We had him dead to rights on that.
Aye.
The board approved his license.
I felt they caved in. It was a betrayal. It was a betrayal of the people of the state of Nevada.
Ronald Reagan, it emerged, had said he was an honorable person, completely honest.
Told me that political power, if you have enough political power or dough, you can get it done. I don't allege any payoffs there. I think you're talking about pure political power reaching right to the White House.
Barbara had wanted him to go back to work, and work he did, giving nearly 1,000 concerts between 1977 and 1990. But the nights were growing cold for the Rat Packers. Sammy Davis died. Dean Martin, too. Sinatra's mother had been killed when her chartered jet hit a mountain above Palm Springs.
The devastation was unreal when she passed away. I mean, I've seen men break down, but I've never seen men like in a coma, almost comatose.
He must know something, but he don't say nothing.
Sinatra continued touring like an old man in a hurry, possessed of the same drive that marked him out in his youth.
He did some performances that were absolutely incredible. Like suddenly 40 years had disappeared. I mean, he was pretty old. And he would have lapses of memory, for example.
You felt that he was pushing himself?
Oh, I think he was making a valiant effort, yes.
Nobody else was pushing him?
No. No.
Did he know he was losing it?
I think so. I think so. I could see him thinking, you know. You could read his mind almost.
That last performance that he ever did in Fukuoka, Japan, we got on the bus after the last performance, and generally the orchestra gets on the bus to go back to the hotel, and there's all kinds of chatter. There was silence, and some of the guys were in tears because we knew this was it. We were all sad. We left the next day to come back to the States.
Frank Sinatra retreated to a beach house in Malibu, overlooking the Pacific Ocean.
I remember thinking, as he went up to his bedroom, I followed him up the stairs, and there's this little twin bed and a piano across from that, a Spartan room.
He spent his days talking, reminiscing.
The word that started coming out from friends and people that were there, and those of us that chose not to be around near the end because it was just too tough to see, was that he was in pain. You know, he couldn't walk and he couldn't get up, and you know, was very verbal as to not at some one point wanting to live. And you don't want to see a special human being like that suffer.
It was a perfect ending, the way he wanted it. He could have lived. He didn't want it anymore. He lived 1,000 times. He wanted out.
Some of those who loved him best weren't invited to his funeral.
But I think about him quite often. I go to the house and I look around, and then I talk about him, and it helps me get along. I think it keeps me peaceful.
Unlike the splendid graves that marked the lives of the mafia bosses he so admired, the greatest pop singer who ever lived had a small stone set in the ground.
Francis Albert Sinatra, beloved.
On it was written, "The best is yet to come." Las Vegas paid him its own tribute, briefly.
They lowered the lights on the strip for him for about 20 minutes, and that was the end of it. And after that, it's back in action. The beat goes on.
What still makes Sinatra cool to a new generation is partly his perceived closeness to the mafia. It gives him a kind of edge, a dark glamour.
The underworld is an evil operation, but, you know, it plays in America. I mean, it does real well in Hollywood.
He made the unacceptable acceptable.
He absolutely made the unacceptable acceptable.
The unanswerable question, how much did this infinitely talented man really need the mafia?
I've loved, I've laughed and cried.
He thought he needed him.
I've had my fill.
He wanted to have that power behind him. He wanted to have that strength behind him.
For whatever reason, he had that insecurity. And then he had this, you know, of course, this incredible talent and this ability to touch the human emotion.
To think I did all that.
And the memory of what Sinatra had been.
Oh, well, there you are, you see. Nobody could ever forget that. Nobody had ever done that before. There had not been anybody like him before. There has not been anybody like him since, and I don't think there ever will be. It was unique. One and only.